My name is Mubarak, founder of Mubarak Law. I've been practicing immigration for over 16 years. And we also handle at our office full service immigration, regardless of where you live in the United States or throughout the world. For example, next week I will be attending a merit adjustment interview in Colorado for some clients that we have out there. And obviously we represent people all over the world who are going through the immigration process. As we kind of continued to represent people for several years, they started to trust us with so many different cases. Specifically, people came to us when they've had unfortunate car accidents or slip and falls. So we do handle personal injury as well. So what we're going to talk about today is the EB-5 Investor Program, important deadlines and things that you should know, or I think that is important. We're going to do a presentation. So let's go ahead and get started. So at Mubarak Law, as I mentioned, we are full service and we do handle a variety of immigration, whether it's employment-based, investors, family-based, removal, and humanitarian options as well. But today we will focus on the EB-5 program. So what is the EB-5 program? I'll go through this pretty general overview and some history so you understand what it's all about. So EB-5 program was established in the 1990s with the Congress establishing a program to stimulate job growth, to stimulate the economy, where individuals will invest $1 million to create 10 full-time jobs. This was meant to be a temporary program that throughout the years received several extensions or sunset dates, which kind of led us to a problematic situation back in 2022. And however, Congress has reauthorized the Regional Center Program and the EB-5 program under RIA. So the investments amounts have changed. Previously, it used to be $500,000 and $1 million. Now it is $800,000 and $1,050,000. And this, in my opinion, is one of the most direct pathways to residency. So we're going to explain how to get your financials in order, what type of avenues there are. So a lot of times people ask me during a consultation, what is the easiest way to get a green card, or how can I become a citizen? What do I need to file? Well, under the US immigration laws, you can't just simply apply for residency or simply apply for citizenship. You must have a pathway to that residency. So usually immediate family, like a spouse or a child that's over 21 years old, that is a US citizen. Or a direct sponsorship through employment, which can take several years. But there's also the EB-5 option. So what are some of the benefits of the EB-5 program? Obviously, the big one is, yes, the residency card, and it's the direct path. But I also like to mention some indirect benefits that we see once somebody becomes a resident or is pending adjustment of status in the United States. So first, this is a big one, I think, is the educational, some significantly discounted tuition. So not directly because you're an EB-5 applicant, but because you become a resident. Many of my clients for the EB-5 program are parents abroad whose children are studying in the international programs here in the United States. And if you don't know, international tuition is quite expensive. Oftentimes $40,000, $50,000 a year. Sometimes even more. However, once the individual becomes a resident, they're no longer going to be paying that tuition. So I think this is very important to remember for people who might have several children or whose children are currently in the international student program. The EB-5 program might be something to strongly consider given the amount of investment you're already putting in your children. So freedom of workplace, this is more about highlighting the difference between an employment-based visa or an investor visa where you're tied to a specific type of employment. So for example, if you are on an H-1B visa, you must work for that company. If you have invested in the United States through E-2, you're limited to work for that entity. With the EB-5, of course, once you become a resident, you're free to work anywhere you'd like. If you are enjoying the benefit of adjustment of status and have work authorization while your EB-5 petition is pending, again, you're free to work wherever you'd like once you have that work authorization. Some other benefits of the program is that each investment amount will benefit an entire family, but we need to make sure we include what that family is. So under the US immigration laws, a spouse, an unmarried child under 21, all receive the benefit of your investment through the EB-5 program. I was meeting with a really beautiful family on Monday. They were from Pakistan, and their concern was, how do I bring my entire family here? It was a really lovely father, except 4 of his children were over the age of 21. So we had to explain that these children are not considered immediate relatives, and each family would need their own investment amount of $800,000 in order to obtain that benefit. So that is something that's great. So if you have, whether you're single and you're doing this program, it's $800,000, or if you're married with 4 children under 21 years old, it's that same investment amount. How are we eligible for the EB-5? What is required? The EB-5 investment requires, of course, the capital investment, which is the $800,000 under the Regional Center program. It is also $1,050,000 under the direct investment path. We have to show that it's going to benefit the U.S. economy and that there's going to create or preserve at least 10 jobs. So if you're doing direct investment, your business or your new commercial enterprise is responsible for creating these 10 full-time jobs. If you're doing a regional center, we want to find a regional center that's going to create those jobs on your behalf. Lawful source of funds, we're going to talk about this. You have to show where this money came from, where it originated, any assets you've used, and of course, the derivative family members that we mentioned, a spouse or children under 21 years old. These are people who are eligible under one investment through the EB-5 program. Source of funds, right? So source of funds is a big portion of any EB-5 application petition to obtain residency. So if you're doing a regional center, again, it's $800,000. If you're doing direct, $1,050,000. Simply transferring money is not going to be enough to show the source of funds. Showing a bank transfer from your home country overseas to the United States, that in and of itself also not sufficient. They're going to want to know, well, how did you earn this money? If it's through wages, can you show us your tax returns? Can you show us your pay stubs? Can you show us how you've accumulated these funds over time? We like to show assets that have been sold and you've received profits. So let's say I wanted to use a piece of property that I've inherited from a family member, and I inherited it 15 or 20 years ago. Well, we do want to provide to the US government that 15 or 20 years ago, we inherited this money. So we want to look at what documents do we have to show that. Was there a will? Is there an actual transfer under that foreign government's entity from your relative to your name? And then when you went to go sell this property, we want to then show a sales contract, the transfer of funds between you and the purchaser, and then also even transferring the name of the property from your name to the individual, so that the US government knows that this was a legitimate transaction and you're not trying to misrepresent any documentation. Another thing that we've been seeing lately since the new law changes is they want to know 20 years of employment history. They would also like to see your tax returns for 7 years. So these are really important things. And before you invest in any regional center or direct EB-5 investment, we want to make sure that we have a lawful source of funds that is going to be successful. So it's really critical that we do our homework on this and that it can be traced and show the transactions that correspond with it. We also like to provide a CV or resume if somebody who has been working for several years, and to demonstrate why they are earning such high salaries, for example. One thing that is really interesting and that happens more often than you think is a gift. You can gift this money to somebody. So if I personally don't have the $1 million cash or the $800,000 cash, but my parents want me to obtain residency in the United States, my parents can gift me this money so that I may invest in the EB-5 program. We would then have to show that gifter's source of funds. And, we want to make sure that all of this is lawful and that you can trace those individual source of funds as well. Again, a lot of times the people who are pursuing EB-5 programs will tell you, this is for my children's future. This is for a plan B. So it's not uncommon for us to see gifts from parents, family members, or significant others. So source of funds is very, very important. So which investment path is right for you? I do get asked this question. Many people who have reached this level of wealth are ambitious or entrepreneurs, and they want to know, should I do a direct investment or should I do the regional center pathway? And oftentimes they ask me questions like, what is my return on investment, right? Because they're investors and this is an investor visa. Well, I like to remind everybody, you're sitting with an immigration attorney. I do not work for Merrill Lynch or Bank of America. I'm not here to make you money. I would love to, but I'm here to make sure that our process for residency is successful. So anytime there's an investment, your money must be at risk. So you do have to understand that there is no guarantee in any process. We've had significant success from almost all of our cases to date. So the truth is about, the important thing is about finding a good project, preparing your source of funds, and making sure to provide USCIS with what they need. Now, these entrepreneurs will say, well, Naif, I would prefer to do direct investment because $1 million today, I can turn that into 3 million in 5 years. I don't want to get less than 1% return. Well, we talk about some of the risks associated with that. So with the direct investment, you are responsible to make sure that the entity survives, the entity maintains 10 full-time jobs, because a lot of times it's sometimes difficult to either hire or sometimes to maintain staffing. Or if you're new to the United States, if your business fails, you could now potentially be out your investment amount and also out your green card process. So I personally, if I had it my way for the clients, I prefer the regional center route. I believe that tends to be more direct, less stressful for the clients, and more predictable. Although we can't guarantee anything, we like situations where we can predict potential issues and have multiple people, others responsible for the job creation. So with the regional centers, you're essentially joining their project and you are one of multiple investors, and the regional centers are creating numerous jobs. So I like the idea of the regional center taking the responsibility of the job creation rather than our individual clients. I'd like you to focus on doing what you do, making money in your industry, working, continuing your own career, because maintaining a direct investment in the 10 full-time jobs can be quite burdensome, and if it does not work out, would be disastrous on numerous levels. So for regional centers, there's a lot out there, a lot of things you need to know. What is their track record? Do they have a 956F approval? Do they have one pending? Has other people received the residency cards through it? So it's very important we do the due diligence on regional centers. And it's very important you keep in mind, if something's too good to be true, it probably is. So when you see an individual or a project promising you guaranteed 10% return, guaranteed processing, but it's kind of, they don't have a lot of time in the industry, or you can't trace numerous approvals to them or track records, I would be cautious of it. A lot of the super heavy hitter regional center programs offer less than 1% return. And that's usually a hard pill for my entrepreneurial clients to swallow. But if they have a good product, they know it, and they are basically in the business. We'll create the jobs for you. We'll give you hopefully a mitigated risk investment, and in exchange, you're getting the residency card. So if you're doing the EB-5 program, if you're sitting with an immigration attorney, your return on investment should be the resident card and, yes, receiving your monies back. But you want to make sure that you review the regional center programs and do the due diligence on that. We oftentimes will tell our clients, we want to look at their job creation numbers, their track record. You, on your hand, should be looking at the financials. If you have a financial planner or somebody you trust to evaluate it and mitigate or review the risk associated, we encourage you to go ahead and do that. Okay, so earlier when we started this presentation, I mentioned it was a temporary program and there was receiving sunsets, and it was constantly being kicked by Congress an extra year. Well, the RIA, Reform and Integrity Act, occurred, and this had numerous changes, which included increasing the amounts, an official sunset date, and also some benefits like a filing for adjustment of status, which was huge for so many people. So there's also greater scrutiny on regional centers, more fees, there could be site visits. So it's really important that this occurred, because now we have the regional center program back, and there's hopefully additional protections for individuals who are pursuing this process. Now, you might have heard me mentioning if you follow us on socials, I've been kind of screaming about the different, the specific deadline or filing this year by September 30th. Why? So Congress, yeah, this is our graphic, sky is falling, right? So Congress specifically authorized this new RIA program until September 2027. However, it stated that to be protected under the current requirements, you must have filed by September 30th, 2026. So for those individuals who are considering EB-5 and then may file between October 1st, 2026 and September 2027, if Congress reauthorizes the program and changes the requirements, you could be subject to the new changes. So the one way to grandfather or protect and to know, because again, we want to know what's required, we want to know how to predict issues, would be filing by the September 30th deadline. All right, so it's also important to know, I've mentioned certain things like adjustment of status and or consular processing, but in order to qualify for adjustment of status, your visa must be current. So this is the employment visa bulletin, and you can see EB-1, 2, 3, and then you'll see certain religious workers set aside EB-5, set aside infrastructure. Basically, if you see a C under the EB-5 category, that means you're eligible for adjustment of status if you are in lawful status and you meet the set requirements under INA 245, right? This does not mean you're going to immediately get an approval. It means there's a visa available, so you can submit your 526E, your 485, which is your application for permanent residency, your 765, which is a work permit, and your I-131, which is the advanced parole document that allows you to travel. Once you file the 485, you're not allowed to travel until those documents are issued. But the 485 is one of the new benefits under the RIA program, and that is something that we like to see here. So basically, so you have an idea of how many visas get set aside. There's the rural, high unemployment, and infrastructure projects. So if you see regional centers talking about how they're designated or wherever it is, this is so you know that technically if you're from like India or China, where sometimes there's a backlog, these are important things to look at, because sometimes there might be a backlog in general, but if under these specific categories, there may be more available. So these are all very important to know, and questions to ask and to plan for your EB-5 journey for you and your family. So what's the correct filing process? Should I do adjustment of status? Should I do consular processing? Let me quickly explain the two and see which ones might work better for you. So consular process means you're outside of the United States and you would go through a US consulate to receive your visa. So basically you would file the 526E, which is what you're going to be your regional center documents, proof of the job creation, proof of investment, proof of subscription, and then also your source of funds and your background information and your family members or derivatives who are being included, taxes, and employment history, again, source of funds. So you file the 526E. Here's a little flow chart. It quickly moves to a USCIS approval, but this is just a chart What we don't have here is the processing times. Oftentimes we see processing times upwards to 2 years, 2.5 years. Some priority processing projects, we are seeing them adjudicated more quickly, like maybe in like a year. But assuming, let's say on average, 2 years, USCIS has approved your petition, it will then be sent to the National Visa Center. Now, 2 years is a long time, and a lot of things can change. However, the September 30th deadline protect us from any changes in the law. And number two, if you have children that are 18, 19 years old, while the petition is pending, we're going to freeze their age under the Child Protection Act. And so that's something that we also have to keep in mind. Remember, when your child becomes 21, they're no longer going to consider immediate relatives. However, if the 5260 has been filed on their behalf, we can freeze their age while the pending adjudication of that petition. So USCIS approves it. The file gets sent to the National Visa Center, which we then, our number's a little bit out of order here, but follow your eyes. But I'll modify this presentation and we'll share it for anybody who's interested. Once the National Visa Center has your background documents, has your you get your medical examination, and you get scheduled for an interview. They're going to go to the interview, verify, might ask you some questions about the project. How much do you know about it? Might ask you some questions about your source of funds. Generally, we'll issue your immigrant visa. And upon entry, you'll receive a 2-year conditional resident card. We'll talk about removal of conditions later, but this is consular process for those who are abroad. Okay, so you file a petition only. So if you are abroad and you have a tourist visa, or you don't want to be landlocked in the United States because you have to go home, you have to get back to work, you cannot be landlocked, then consular process may be for you and not adjustment of status. Adjustment of status, again, was something that was new for us under RIA, and it's a wonderful thing because the processing times can be 2 years. So adjustment of status basically has allowed our clients and other investors to pursue their residency card, employment authorization document, and travel document while their underlying petition is pending. So as I mentioned, if the case takes 2 years and you want to start living your life in the United States, you can start doing that under the Adjustment of Status program. It allows you to remain in the US during the adjudication. Several months after filing, you'll see here, you'll get the work permits, and the EAD is a work permit, or the advanced parole approval. So here, 526, adjustment of status, 485, 765, 131, you file it all at the same time. Receipt notices, fingerprints, then the approval. From the work permit and travel document approval, we're probably going to wait another year or so, and then you'll hopefully receive an approval from USCIS, which leads to the 2-year conditional resident or green card. And then after 2 years, for both people, either adjustment of status or consular processing, you would have to file 829 to remove conditions. So in order to obtain your 10-year permanent resident card, which then the next natural step for most people would be naturalization. Now, something I'd like to add here, filing Form 829 can also be a lengthy process where the adjudication times can be 2 or 3 years in order to get an approval. And you're going to say, well, now if I've now had my green card for 6 or 7 years, when do I get to do the naturalization? Well, you have to wait. You must obtain the residency card for 5 years prior to applying for your naturalization application. So if your 829 is still pending and you've now reached year 5 of your resident card from the original conditional date, you can then still file for naturalization. You know, this is like you get your application in, but it's not going to be adjudicated until the 829 is adjudicated. So this is the 829 period that would kind of show that you created the jobs, sustained the investment, and then you've removed the conditions. We briefly touched on that. And that kind of leads us to the end of our presentation. We tried to provide you with an overview of the EB-5 program. Again, some of the takeaways, if you are joining us, it would be the September 30th deadline. So if you've been on the fence about it for a while, then now is the time. And also to be mindful of any shady regional centers or those who don't have the track records that you want to see when investing such a large amounts of money. Let's see here if I have any questions. Okay, here's one. How long will my money be in the regional center? So most regional centers have their own term or agreement, and you want to think of it as two different cars, but you're both heading in the same direction. You have the USCIS car, which requires your investment to be in the project for 2 years, but the regional center agreement might have you promise to be with them for 5 or 6 years. That is going to vary with projects, and typically we tell people your money is probably going to be locked in a regional center for 5 to 6 years. Any other questions? All right, I hope you guys enjoyed this live. There is one here. Let's see here. What type of regional product can I invest in? Are there specific industries? So regional centers vary, right? We've done hotels, logistic facilities. We've done, I think, a solar power plant, which I thought was really cool. Again, even some bridges and infrastructure projects. So there is no specific industry related to a regional center, but you want to make sure that they have the regional center designation. And then there's some benefits depending on if it is an infrastructure project, if it is a rural project. So if those are things that we talked about with the different visas set aside and for processing. So that's a good question. But they do vary. It could even be housing developments or apartment complexes. I like to see, when there's more money invested by the entity rather than the foreign national. So we're not contingent on foreign national investment for projects, that we don't want the project to completely rely on these people who are seeking EB-5s, because what happens if we don't get enough visas or people interested in the program? Does the program die? And how will that affect the few people who were invested in the regional center? So these are things that we want to think about. I hope you guys found this helpful. I'm going to do a plug here to stay informed. You can follow us on socials, YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, but we do try to post updates on everything. We, again, are a full service immigration law firm. So whether it is an extraordinary ability, an EB-2, investor, marriage-based case, domestic violence case, or removal defense, we can typically handle those cases. And if we don't handle it, we'll definitely let you know and probably refer you to somebody who might. I hope this was helpful to everybody. We have done this in exactly 30 minutes, which makes me happy. And please reach out to us if you have any other questions. And if somebody thinks that this video would be very informative to them, you will be able to post this later on our YouTube, and hopefully just lead them to that direction and they'll be able to enjoy this. Again, this is not legal advice, educational purposes. If you have any specific questions, please let me know. I wish you all a wonderful and happy day. Thank you.